All right, let's just dive right in. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are going to unpack and completely demystify a habit that is absolutely exhausting, incredibly common, and honestly, entirely misunderstood. We're talking about overthinking. We're going to look at the hard science, the psychology, and most importantly, the actual actionable steps you can take to win your mind back. So if your brain sometimes feels like a massively crowded room where literally everyone is shouting at once, you are in exactly the right place.
Let's do a really quick mental checklist here. Have you ever just laid in bed completely losing sleep over a totally random conversation you had like 3 years ago? Or spent 10 minutes staring at a restaurant menu because you're terrified of making the wrong choice? What about rehearsing a massive dramatic argument in your head that never actually happened in real life? Or maybe you stared at a text message for 20 solid minutes, drafting, deleting, redrafting, just to ask a friend to reschedule lunch. If you're nodding along to any of this right now, take a deep breath. You are definitely not alone.
And that brings us to our absolute biggest takeaway today. Your brain is not broken. Seriously. You aren't weak, and you're not just being dramatic. When you overthink, your brain is actually doing something incredibly sophisticated. It's acting as a deep processor. The issue isn't that your mind is malfunctioning, it's simply that it is doing its deepest, most complex work at the absolute worst possible time. To fix the machine, we really have to understand how it works. So let's get into section 1, why our brains spiral. Think back like hundreds of thousands of years ago. Human beings were physically pretty weak compared to other predators out there, right? No sharp claws, no thick armor. Our ultimate survival tool was our ability to think ahead. Specifically, our ability to imagine the absolute worst-case scenario. Anticipating danger literally kept us alive. But flash forward to the modern day, and that exact same survival software is still running in the background. Except now, we aren't running from saber-toothed tigers. Instead, your brain applies that intense life-or-death survival instinct to, say, a slightly weird look your coworker gave you in the hallway, or an ambiguous email from your boss. The actual physical danger is completely gone, but man, that alarm system is still blaring. So the crucial thing is figuring out when this alarm actually goes off. Enter the default mode network, or the DMN. Think of your brain during the day as a super busy office worker. They're handling phone calls, emails, immediate tasks, just getting things done. But all day long, these tiny, unprocessed thoughts, an unfinished chore, or an awkward wave to someone who wasn't actually waving at you, they just pile up on a desk. The exact moment you finally stop focusing on the outside world and sit still, your default mode network fires up. It looks at that massive pile of documents and says, all right, time to get to work. Now, what actually triggers this network to go into total overdrive? Well, it usually boils down to a few core things. Childhood trauma or an unpredictable environment can basically teach a young brain that hypervigilance is the only way to stay safe. Then you have the fear of uncertainty, the crushing pressure of perfectionism, and the absolutely exhausting habit of people-pleasing. But honestly, the biggest trigger of all is the illusion of control. We kind of trick ourselves into believing that if we just think about a problem long enough and hard enough, we can somehow control the outcome. Which naturally leads us to the absolute worst time for any overthinker. Let's look at section 2, the 3 a.m. circus. You know the exact feeling. Your head hits the pillow, you're dead tired, and suddenly, boom, your brain turns into a loud, chaotic courtroom. Psychologists actually call this cognitive load release. During the day, you carry a heavy cognitive load. You're working, talking, scrolling on your phone, just doing things. But the second all of that external stimulation drops to zero, your internal thoughts rush in to fill the empty space, kind of like water breaking right through a dam.
During the day, the logical manager of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, is running the show. It's rational. It tells you, hey, that awkward moment, not a big deal. But by 3 a.m., that manager is completely exhausted and has officially clocked out. And who takes the wheel? The limbic system? This is the emotional center of your brain. It does not do logic. It does full-blown soap opera-level drama. That is exactly why a tiny mistake you made at noon suddenly feels like a life-ruining catastrophe at midnight.
Left completely unchecked, this emotional brain pulls you into 3 rapid-fire nighttime traps. First, the I should have, where you're digging up a conversation from 2017 as fresh evidence of your failure. Next is the what if, imagining literally every single way tomorrow could end in disaster. And finally, the worst one. Why am I like this? This is where your brain stops attacking your actions and starts attacking your actual identity. It's a vicious, chaotic spiral that will completely hijack your sleep.
Okay, so how do we actually break out of this loop? Let's pivot to section 3, thinking versus rumination.
There is a massive, fundamental difference between deep thinking and rumination. Deep thinking is action-oriented. It's saying, okay, if this goes wrong, then I will do X to fix it. It moves you forward. Imagine standing on the edge of a swimming pool. Deep thinking is assessing the depth, checking your safety, and then just jumping in. Rumination, on the other hand, that's standing on the edge, shivering, endlessly asking, what if the water is cold? What if I look silly? What if everyone stares at me? You are just rehearsing the problem in different costumes without ever finding a solution. And that leads directly to paralysis by analysis.
25. That's the number of minutes it might take an overthinker to draft a simple, hey, can we reschedule text message? They write it, delete it, worry it sounds a little too cold, add an emoji, worry the emoji is too casual, delete it again, and then send it to a friend for review. Look, if this is you, I really want you to remember something. This is not a sign of weakness. It is actually a sign of incredibly deep empathy. You are hyper-aware of how your words will impact another human being. It's an amazing trait. You just don't have an off switch for it yet. But here is the tricky part. You literally cannot just tell yourself to stop thinking. Psychology proves this with the famous white bear experiment. Researchers told people, whatever you do, do not think of a white bear. And of course, what happened? It was absolutely all they could think about. When you forcefully try to suppress a thought, you create what's called a neurological debt. The very second your guard drops, that exact thought rebounds with 10 times the force. So telling an overthinker to just stop worrying is scientifically guaranteed to make the whole thing worse. So if we can't just block the thoughts, what do we do? Let's get into the solutions in section 4, tools to stop spiraling. Let's start with a real game changer, the 90-10 rule. A huge amount of our overthinking comes from worrying about other people's opinions. We need to completely flip that script. 90% of your self-worth, your appreciation, and your evaluation of any situation has got to come from within. Only 10% should be left to what the rest of the world thinks. So, if you're preparing for a big presentation, put 90% of your mental energy into how you can deliver value, and strictly cap your worry about the audience's reaction at 10%. Okay, but what about when it is literally 3 a.m. and the spiral hits hard? This is your nighttime rescue protocol. Step 1, do a brain dump to address what some cultures refer to as kujli, that really persistent mental itch. Physically write the thought down on paper with a logical next step. You're basically telling your brain, hey, I've got this, I'll handle it tomorrow. Step 2, unclench your jaw and physically drop your shoulders. This activates your vagus nerve, which sends a biological safety signal directly to your racing mind. And step 3, stimulus control. If you've been spinning out for 20 minutes, physically leave the bed. You have to teach your brain that the bed is for sleeping, not for running a mental marathon. I absolutely love this next metaphor. You cannot be a dam trying to hold back a rushing river of thoughts. The pressure will just build until you break. Instead, you need to be a traffic cop at a really busy intersection. Your job isn't to stop all the cars, it's to observe the flow, understand where the traffic is coming from, and gently direct it. Just acknowledge the thought. Say, okay, brain, I see what you're doing, and then consciously direct your focus somewhere else. But to really master this whole shebang, we have to rewire our daytime habits. Start practicing quick decisions on the small stuff. Give yourself exactly 1 minute to pick a menu item, for example. Next, try to actually embrace uncertainty. I mean, if you knew the exact final score of a sports match before it even started, it would be incredibly boring to watch, right? And finally, when you start catastrophizing, separate possibility from probability. Yes, a plane crash is possible, but statistically, it's highly improbable. Stop letting your brain treat a 1% chance like a 99% guarantee. Which leaves us with this final, really powerful thought. The goal of all of this isn't to achieve some perfectly quiet, entirely empty mind. You're a deep processor. Your mind is meant to be active and brilliant. The real goal is simply to build a much more honest relationship with your thoughts. To be able to look at a mental spiral and say, hey, I know what you're trying to protect me from, but I've got it from here. So I will leave you with this one question. Tonight, when the lights finally go out, are you going to let your mind drag you back into that courtroom, or are you going to step up, take the gavel, and finally dismiss the case?